Hi, today I would like to show you how to write these square chunky letters that I came up with for one of my projects. The letters in this exemplar were written using three different pens: a 16mm Pratik pen, a 5/16 inch Horizon pen, and a size 4.5 Browser pen. And the reason why these particular pens were chosen is because each one of them is about half the size of the larger one. For this demo, however, I am going to use the Pilot Parallel pens since those are more readily available than the specialty pens I used for the original. I'm going to use 5mm grid paper. The height of these letters is approximately 2 nib width. And when I say approximately, technically the Pilot Parallel pen is 6mm and my grid is 5mm. And if I wanted to be precise, I would need to line the paper to have the 12mm X height. However, these letters don't need to be so accurate, so it's perfectly fine to write them at a 10mm X height instead. These letters are written at a 0-degree pen angle, and they are squared off, so you have the rounded corners and then the sides are completely straight. And some of the parts of the letters need to be written with a smaller pen, such as this terminal at the top of the A. Now I'm going to do this letter one more time because the first one came out a little crooked. Make the corners rounded, but not too rounded. The letter B is made in 2 strokes. First, the stem, and then the bowl. For C, we will need 2 different pens again. The first stroke is done with a 6mm pen, and the second one with a 3.8, and so is the third one. For D, first write the bowl, and then the vertical stem. Note how there is a serif on the left side of vertical stems in both B and D. The E is very similar to the C. The top bowl is the same size as the stem, but the terminal in the bottom is smaller, and that is because the terminal is not an essential part of the letter, while the bowl is. The F is the only letter that has both an ascender and a descender in this alphabet. And again, the terminal is written with a smaller size pen. The G is a lot of fun. The bowl of the G is smaller than X height. In fact, it is about 3/4 of X height. The G is definitely the trickiest letter of the alphabet because you need to use both pens and switch from one to another multiple times. I'm going to demo it one more time. We start with a 6mm pen and do the bowl first. Then we add the ear with the 3.8mm, and then the first bend in the tail is done with a 3.8mm, and then the right side of it is done with a 6mm pen, and finally the terminal on the left is done with a 3.8 again. The H consists of 2 strokes: the vertical stem that starts with a serif on the left and ends with a serif on the right, and then the bowl, which is done with a similar movement. The I is a single stroke with a dot on top. The J has a descender, but it does not have a terminal on the bottom because that would make it too heavy. The K in this alphabet has a closed bowl. The L uses the same basic stroke, except it's a little bit longer on the bottom right. The M is an interesting one. If you write it just using the same strokes as we used for the other letters, you will see that the arch looks funny because it is angular at the top on the left and then has a nice curve on the right. And we don't want that. So what are we going to do instead? Watch carefully. We're going to use the same basic strokes. And then we're going to come in with the corner of the nib and fix the arch so that it is symmetrical. And we're going to do this for the second arch of the M also. And the same thing applies to the N. The O is simply 2 halves. The P starts with a little serif on the top left. And also needs a small correction for the arch of its bowl. The Q is not exactly a mirror reflection of the P because its right side is rounded instead of angular. The R has a longer foot, just like the L, and then the top of the R is done using the smaller size nib, and it also needs a small arch correction. The S is the only letter that requires an angle change. Watch how I'm twisting the pen in the middle to maintain the thickness and then coming back to 0 degrees. So the angle changes from 0 to about 45 degrees and then back to 0, all in one stroke. Let me do that again. The terminals of the S are also done with a 3.8 millimeter pen. And with the S, you have to be careful to keep it upright. As you can see in this example, I ended up with a slanted S, which doesn't fit the rest of the alphabet. So I'll have to redo this one and make it straight. Once again, we start at 0 degrees, twist to 45 degrees, and then back to 0, and at the terminals with a smaller pen size. The T doesn't go all the way to the ascender height, and it has the same foot as the L and a thin crossbar. The first stroke of the U is the same as the letter I. For the second stroke, keep the top flat without the serif. And of course, the bowl needs a small touch-up to be symmetric. For the V, both strokes start with a serif on the left. And this is done mostly to make sure that the V looks different from the U. In the W, the first stroke is like the I, the second stroke is like a second stroke of the U, and the third stroke is like a second stroke of the V. And then the bowl needs a little retouching. The X is the first letter for which we're going to need the third pen. We make the first stroke with the 6mm pen and then rough in the thinner strokes to make sure that the letter is well balanced. On the left, we use the same 3.8mm pen and we twist it slightly so there is a little bit of a wasting at the beginning of a stroke. For the right side, we're going to use the 2.4mm pen. And we start at the top at the 0-degree angle and then twist slightly as well. The Y is relatively straightforward. The first stroke is the same as many of the other entry strokes. The second stroke is straight at the top, just like the U. And on the bottom, we have the same terminal. Finally, the Z. The first stroke is a diagonal at 0 degrees. And for the terminals, we are going to use the 2.4mm pen because otherwise they would look too large and they would be disproportionate to the rest of the letter. Well, that is it. That's the full alphabet. Now I'm going to write the word peacefully using this alphabet, and this recording is on 5x speed. Notice how I'm not using the terminals on the E and the A because they would create weird spacing issues. In general, the letter spacing is pretty generous. Thanks for watching and good luck!